For Once Upon a Time in Iraq, James Blumell, the director, met me very early on in the process before we actually started. And he explained to me that he wanted to make the series he wanted to make a series in the past tense, because he'd made lots of series in the present tense, as in actuality-based documentaries. It was new for him to work at Archive. So I was quite excited by this, and the unique selling point of Once Upon a Time in Iraq was that we told the story in 5 chapters through the experiences of a finite amount of interviewees. There weren't lots of interviewees, so we began casting or looking for the interviewees initially through the archive, which was amazing, and obviously through newspapers and books and everything else. But the archive, first of all, served as, we looked at everything that had been shot on the ground and our films that had been made about the Iraq War in the early years, especially 2003, 2004, so that we could find characters for our series that would be able to tell the story throughout the Iraq War. And once we started this process, we were able to get their unique experiences. And then I was able to locate all the cameramen and the people who worked in those particular areas where our contributors were based or where they lived. So we told, what was unique as well about Once Upon a Time in Iraq is we really looked at people on the ground. We didn't really interview any politicians, or we didn't use any politicians in the series. And the archive was very, very important in seeding and I would say the archive was very important in locating our contributors in the story. So the first decision we made is, let's try and use B-roll or archive material that was uncut. And let's try and find material that really showed Iraq like it hadn't been shown before, that it hadn't been beamed into our rooms through news reports and things. And let's get the contributors to tell their own story. We were just so surprised. There was so much footage out there. And Miriam came on with me, and we just had to start digitizing a lot of material that was coming in from various places, because lots of it was on tape, it was undigitized. And secondly, logging it, obviously. So there was a lot of logging, and a lot of logging, very, very distressing images. You know, I mean, it seems a long time ago, but it's really only, 2003. But 2003 in terms of archive is a long time ago, because first of all, there weren't many camera phones in that period. So predominantly most of the footage I was sourcing was coming from DV-Cam, Digibeta, Beta. So there was a lot of digitizing and a lot of translation. I had a fantastic team of interpreters who were doing the interviews for us as well, and they helped translate a lot of the footage, and a brilliant tech team to help us digitize the material. Paul and Charlotte were amazing. So the archive was an incredibly collaborative process, both with my producers who were on the ground, both in Iraq and America, with the tech team who were bringing in the material, digitizing it for me, with Miriam, who helped me log all the material. And, it was, and obviously with the archives were amazing and very generous in that they were able to access me lots of B material, and they digitized a lot of material for me as well. So, yeah. I was on the project with James for 2 years, so I worked on it from beginning to end. Miriam came in a bit later, and she worked with me to the end as well, because there was a lot of paperwork, and of course, it was all-consuming. It was fantastic. All the edits happened in-house. I sat with them, and I was with my director and editors the whole process through, which was amazing, because you're just involved at every level of the production. And the producers, the other thing was, which is really fantastic and a real honor for me, is that I was able to collaborate with, Ashley Gilbertson, who was a photographer in New York, or I was able to collaborate with Waleed, who was in a lot of the footage and had a lot of footage, and some of the people who shot him in Iraq. He was one of our main things. some of those camera people and directors gave me all their rushes. And I mean, it was just, you know, it had never been seen. Most of the material in the series hadn't been seen before. So, you know, it was an amazing journey. And it was, you know, we had all the emotions. There was joy, there was there was frustration, there was like just utter, you know, sometimes it was really, really tough, you know. But, you know, it was, I'm very proud of this series because of the collaborative process, both between the contributors, the production team, and really now, you know, the contributors, the production team, and now the audience, because so many people have really loved this series. And, you know, even though it's a tough watch, so many people have really engaged with it. So. There were certain points in the war, for example, so sometimes this is where the archive really informed the contributors, because when James and the producers went to interview the contributors, they had the footage to show them a lot of the time. Because I had started so early, we were able to get the contributors to engage with the footage. And of course, this was very moving for them, because they were looking at footage that, you know, they probably hadn't seen before, but which they would have lived through. So, you know, or which was illustrating a period they would have lived through. So in the edits, we had several of those stories, like the Walid stories. Each story with a personality or with a character, I would have indexed all the footage in relation to those stories. So for Walid, I would have got all the footage that was shot of him, of the occasions or of the events he was describing. And basically I dated it all. I put it all, yeah, I dated it all. So the editor, so I could work with the editor and say, this is all the footage you're going to need for Walid, and this is what's happening in Iraq at the same time. And then this is kind of what George Bush is doing in America. So we didn't really use the politicians, but we needed for context a little bit of audio now and again. And this is what's happening with Tony Blair or whatever. So yeah, so basically I kind of coutured that for them, so that and the editors had a huge part in the use of the archive, because again, they're so creative and wonderful. And even though I would give them all the material, they often used it in ways that even surprised me, to be honest. So, you know, it really was collaborative. I am constantly surprised by what I find. I'm constantly surprised by what is shot. Now, I know everybody has a camera phone today and everything, but I am amazed at what people shoot, and I'm amazed at how much material just lies dormant sometimes. You know what I mean? It's not really until you need something you go for it. But on this series, I couldn't quite believe the amount of footage that is out there that really, you know, that really, really illustrates what happened. And I'm always surprised by how much material really lies in a room somewhere, or, you know, archives don't have the resources, broadcasters probably don't have the resources to bring everything in. But, you know, I really, really feel that for me, in a time where we have so much data, so much of it becomes important later. It's really, really, that surprises me. Secondly, what surprises me is how you can move storytelling with archive on. You know, I've been doing it a long time, and I'm always amazed by how archive can travel a story and travel a narrative. I mean, archive footage it brings the past into the present. You know what I mean? It's immersive, and it doesn't matter that it happened in 2003, 2004, that war. But when our people are talking, they're back in that period, and the archive authenticates that and brings them back. And for me, you know, there's nothing, as an audiovisual medium, the use of archive and testimony for me is the essence of documentary making. Love it. We learn from our mistakes. I mean, anybody who's worked and illustrated Vietnam, and you look at what happened in Iraq afterwards, there are so many of the mistakes. You can see it on camera, you know, what happens on the ground, what happens when soldiers come into a country and, you know, they move on you know, other people's turf. It's just, you know, there's so much to learn. I mean, and, you know, the footage does not lie, really. You know what I mean? It's just lying there, and, you know, you see the experiences of these people, and you know, it's for me, it's even more important now. You know, again, it's authenticating footage as well. It's very difficult today because there's so much footage being shot that you just, you know, it's just, you know, I really, I wouldn't like to be an archive producer in 20 years' time and doing something about now, because I've just finished a series on the pandemic and there was so much material, like it was just insane. And sometimes I think, you know, for me, it's probably better to have less and to go through it than to have more and just not do it properly, you know? So, yeah.